Good morning, beautiful people. Today I have an awesome guest for you. I am with the beautiful Sina Summers. Good morning, Sina.
Good morning, Sarah. Lovely to be here.
So Sina has 20 years experience in storytelling practices and understands the impact that this has on her audiences. She is the managing director of her own business, Impact Stories. She has worked as a research journalist interviewing many people and produced feature programs for SBS Radio. Sina also has a master's degree in social science and communication, is a qualified speaker with the Speakers Institute, and has a diploma in business studies. I would love for you to share about your diagnosis with endometriosis, which I believe was in your early 20s, and what that journey looked like for you.
Yeah, look, it was challenging for sure. So I was initially diagnosed with endometriosis, as you said, in my early 20s. I had no idea what it was. I was just in excruciating pain every month, so every time I ovulated. And that's challenging in itself. I mean, just continuing with work, I operated a business at the time. So I had to keep going, and yet you're doubled up with pain. So a challenge in itself to be able to, balance the two. So eventually that pain got, it hit the Richter scale, and I ended up in hospital, and they did a laparoscopy, and that was the original diagnosis for endometriosis. And the doctor at the time, who was a lovely man, came out afterwards. This was just a day appointment, held my hand, and he said, I think you should go home, get a hot water bottle and take a Panadol. And bless his heart, he was trying in his own way to be, comforting, but it was of no help to me at all. And so I went back home, and it was like, okay, where do I go from here? So I went to my local GP, and she then referred me to a specialist. So I trotted off to see her. She was a very forthright woman. I think she could have led an army through a battleground. She was kind of a bit scary, really. And I was only in my early 20s, so I felt kind of quite vulnerable around her. But, I sort of looked up to her too, because I thought, okay, she's a specialist. She knows her area of expertise. Anyhow, the end of the consultation with her, she recommended that I take a drug called Danazol, which at that time was sort of the go-to recommendation for people who were diagnosed with endometriosis. And I did a lot of research on that, and started to find out about this particular, prescription drug. So I knew a little bit about it before I went to see her. And so while I was in her office, I questioned her recommendation. Scary thing to do, I can say. But I don't know. I just felt that I needed to do that. It was my body, and this is my situation. So she told me off in her consulting rooms. And I said, look, I don't want to take this particular drug. It had a lot of side effects. And they were quite serious side effects. They weren't just little things that would perhaps pass after a period of time. They had been known to prove that there was other consequences out of those side effects, and that didn't appeal to me at all. So I actually said to her at the time, I don't want to take this particular prescription drug. So she told me that I was stupid in her office, which was really insulting.
Of course.
So I paid for that consultation, which seems bizarre now, but anyway, I did, and walked out. I was holding myself back. I really wanted to cry, but I decided I wasn't going to let her see me cry. So, this sort of strong stand kind of took over, and I walked out. by the time I got down the road, I was crying my eyes out because I felt devastated. I think more than anything, more than what she had said to me, it was the devastation of feeling that there was no help or no alternative to this particular prescription drug. And, you know, this pain was regularly every month, and I didn't want that either. So it was kind of at that point when I got home and some time passed, and I think it was that point of vulnerability that I kind of almost surrendered to it, if that's the right word, and thought, okay, I'm just going to stay in the space, and I really, really need to find another way. And I felt quite resolute about doing that. I had no idea where I was going to start, but I just knew that there had to be another way of you know, dealing with this endometriosis. So I started to do my own research, and what I came up with was two very clear options that I wanted to work with. And one of them was the use of a natural herb called black cohosh, which the North American Indian women used for a hormone balancer. So I decided that was something that I wanted to try. And I went to see some practitioners about that first and found out everything I could, and checked it out as far as I could go before I tried it. And the other thing was that I really looked at my body and started to really understand what was happening with my body. And I realized that the problem that I had with the endometriosis was sort of in the womb. So for us women, it's like our sacred place, you know, it's where everything is sort of contained. And as I started to really go into that more, I then looked at things from an emotional level, which no one had sort of really spoken about that I'd been to see. I know myself that I contain a lot of stress in my stomach, that I hold on to things in my stomach. My stress, it sits there. That's my sort of place. And when I worked that out, I thought, okay, there's something for me to look at here, because I had been through quite a stressful time. And I thought, okay, it's like anything. If there's too much of something, it causes an imbalance, you know, or a dis-ease. And what is it that could be potentially, you know, behind that, if that was a cause? So I went through that process, and I worked with a couple of different people to help me with that as well. And what I found out was that I was holding on to some previous past issues, and I needed to let go of them. So this is not simplistic, because it took a process, but the principle of it is actually quite simple. You know, that's what I had to do. So one of them was to do with my family, and I remember I called my mum and my two sisters and said, look, can we get together? I'd really like to just talk through a few things. It's not at anyone, but just a sharing of things, because I feel I need some help just to let some things go that obviously I'm holding on to. And they were all very reluctant. They were like, oh, Sina, you know, what's this about?
Yeah, I can imagine.
I could feel the resistance, you know. So anyway, I did ask them gently and said, look, I would really appreciate that. Perhaps we can have some lunch and, you know, make it something that's sort of comfortable. And so they agreed, and we did. And it actually turned out to be quite amazing, because I think with me being the initiator in that process of just sharing, it kind of gave them permission to also share. And we actually had this really amazing conversation of things in relation to different family experiences that hadn't been discussed previously, just because life happens. And so there was a lot of things that were freely let go of. And I feel that that was probably the key factor in my healing, although I didn't know it right at the time. So I kept working with those two things. So the black cohosh, I then worked out a plan. I went to see a naturopath and, excuse me, between the two of us, we worked out what would be a good plan for that. And then I kept looking in my own, I guess, my own filing system of things that I was holding on to make sure and keep checking into what else was I holding emotionally in my gut that was putting a lot of stress and pressure in that area. So I kept working on that process and letting go of things as I went. So that all took about 9 months.
Okay.
And I stopped getting the pains. So I thought, okay, I left it for a few months just in case it was coming back. And it didn't. And because I couldn't see that myself, I wasn't too sure what was happening. So I went back to my local GP and I said, look, I'd like to get a laparoscopy done and for someone to just check this, and I'm not getting these pains anymore. What's happening? So that's what I did. And as luck would have it, the surgeon on the day was studying endometriosis. So he was wanting to specialize in this particular field, which was terrific because, I was working with someone who already was very aware of this issue. So I went ahead with that procedure. And when I came out of the anesthetic, he was standing right next to me and he said, I want to shake your hand. And I said, really? Okay. He said, look, your endometriosis has gone. And this was at the same hospital that I had the original diagnosis, which was how many years before that? It was probably about 7 years before that time.
Okay.
But he was able to check the records. So he said, it's gone, and I would love to know what you have done in your own approach to dealing with this, so that I can, bring that into my research and studies with this, which I thought was wonderful.
Yeah, very open-minded.
Yeah. So I did. I went back to him and I shared everything that I knew, and it was lovely to speak to someone in the medical profession, and particularly in the hospital system, who was really open to, hearing all of these aspects. So that was sort of like the journey. It never came back, the endometriosis. It was permanently gone. So I learned a lot from that. I mean, other than just sort of going through the process of that in and out of our hospital system at that time, I learned a lot about myself, heaps about myself, which is always the case, isn't it? You can't change anyone else. You just got to change it from the inside. And, I guess one of them was the emotional healing, and how that is underestimated, I feel. We are emotional as human beings. And how we tend to hold on to things, and life becomes busy and we don't always acknowledge that aspect about ourselves. So it's always good to check in, on every level that you can, and just sort of really have a look at what's needed and what's not, to maintain a balance all the time. But I think also my intuition, it never fails me. And even though I've challenged it many times, and there's been times when I haven't listened to it.
Yes, I know that one for sure.
I think everyone does, you learn and you think, oh, next time,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think with all of that, that really, really brought that home for me, to trust in myself, trust that I do know my body, and listen to that little voice, listen to that gut feeling, um, and follow it through. And I felt very alone when I did that, because there was really literally no one at that time that I was able to go to for sort of any kind of guidance, really. I had to find the right people for that guidance. So I did find some wonderful people, but at the initial beginning of that journey, I felt so vulnerable and so alone. And I had no idea where the journey was going to lead me, or whether I was going to get the results that I had obviously hoped for, which was to clear this endometriosis, to cure it. But I think it's in that vulnerability that things just pop up. And that was the most amazing process, that's so personal, it's really hard to explain it. But I just knew that I had to stay in that space. I couldn't push it away. I didn't want to push it away. I didn't want a quick fix, because that wasn't sustainable. All of those things that came up, the questions that came up for myself, I just had to really stay in that uncomfortable space, which is, when you're vulnerable, it's not comfortable. And just really trust that something was going to come up along this journey. And it did. The right people came forward. The kind of direction that I needed to go just came, and I just trusted that and went with it to see where it was going to lead. So there was a lot of learning in that whole, process.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that really comes to mind when you're talking is just the courage in your early 20s to go against the medical system, to actually ask questions and challenge what is being given to you as the only option is really difficult. And I know so many women who are on their fertility journeys really struggle with that.
Yeah.
How do you advocate for yourself and speak your truth and stand in your own power? Because at the end of the day, as women, as human beings, we know our bodies better than anybody else. Yet we have all these supposed specialists and experts, and they're fantastic, and everything has a place, but telling us what we need to do, and when it doesn't feel right, it takes a lot of courage to stand up for yourself and say, this isn't for me. And the fact that it's being driven by intuition rather than necessarily clear, hard facts that you can present back to somebody and say, hey, I've got a counter solution
Option.
or option, piece of information to give back to you, and then they can analyze it and go, yeah, okay, you're right. It takes a lot of courage. And the other place that you showed huge courage is in being brave enough to sit down with your mum and your sisters and actually have a conversation and say, we need to talk. We need to speak our truth. We need to be honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
So many people don't do that. So kudos to you for being
Thank you, Sarah.
very, very, very brave and honoring yourself, honoring your own journey. And look what it led to. Like, I just want to take a moment just to, you've sort of like glossed over this in a way. It's like, oh, yes, I just, healed my endometriosis. But let's just take a moment just to actually process that.
Yeah.
Through looking at your emotional well-being, through tuning into your body, you were able to change the course of your life, because endometriosis is not fun. I know lots of friends and women that I work with in this space that really struggle with endometriosis. And so for you to be able to heal that and not have to deal with the pain every month, not have to go through surgeries, not have to be, changing your lifestyle every month to cope with it, like that's really very, very special. And so that's why I wanted you to come and share your story today, because there is something so powerful here.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I also will say too that, I mean, you know, a very close friend of mine also had endometriosis a few years after mine had gone, and obviously wanted to hear my story with that a bit more in detail. She actually went to the same specialist that was there to do the laparoscopy at the end, and he recommended some of those things that I had shared, which was really nice for me to hear.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, but my so her situation was different, and I suppose I do want to say that for some people, some endometriosis um, situations can be a lot further down the track.
Sure.
So mine, it was definitely there because they diagnosed it, but obviously it was at the point where I was able to turn it around again. For some people, it might be a different situation. Um, and these are the things that work for me. So I'm kind of aware that, you know, for other people, they might need other things as well, additional things,
Absolutely.
depending on where they're at with that issue.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, absolutely.
um, yeah, so,
But I
but
think
yeah,
it offers hope. It offers
mm,
an alternative perspective that some people will never, like you said, we're never presented with. We're not spoken to about in those medical appointments about the emotional side, about the mind, body, spirit side of our own healing journey. So even if people still have to go down the medical road and have surgeries and all of those things,
yeah,
just knowing that they might be able to do this as well, and that it might make things slightly easier
mm,
is such a gift. So
yeah, yeah, thank you. Well, and you know, this is why I was happy to see the surgeon too. I wanted other women to be told by someone that there are other options. Yeah, I think that experience that I initially had with the specialist who called me stupid for not wanting to take, you know, the drug. I felt like I was at school or something and I'd been told off. But in actual fact, it was such a powerful lesson for me.
mm,
It was incredibly confronting at the time. And I'm not sure myself how I managed to speak up at that time, but it taught me something, you know, quite powerful, and that was that sort of claiming my own body, really, and just, you know, no, this is my body, and I'm going to make these decisions according to what does feel right, and that just felt so not right for me. Um, I didn't question her qualifications, or that, you know, she may have helped a lot of people in her time. So um, that aside, it was me in this situation, and I decided that, you know, that wasn't for me. So that really was quite a powerful lesson in taking another direction and looking at different options. It was almost a catalyst for me.
mm.
Yeah, that's how I took it anyway. You know, I thought, no, there's something in that determination that came through, and thought, no, there's got to be more than that. We're living in this amazing world, and, you know, um, I think too, there was sort of I suppose there still is in some ways, a sort of underlying or not spoken of belief that everybody in the medical profession um, knows everything in terms of, you know, what's right for you. And that's not to say that there's not some wonderful people in the medical profession. There are some great people. But that belief system, I don't think it doesn't stand up when you come up against situations like I did. And I thought, you know, that's got to change. It's got to change for me, because if I go along with that, I'm going to end up with a myriad of other issues. And why would I do that? You know, why would I want to do that? So all those sort of things came into my thinking and led me to make those courageous decisions.
Mm.
And it felt really empowering, you know, to take that power back actually and say, well, hang on. And I didn't do it defiantly against her, because I actually didn't see her again. I kind of walked away from that connection. I wanted to, the determination was more just on my own way of curing my own issue. Yeah.
Mm. So you've mentioned already about being really vulnerable in that space of knowing that that wasn't what you wanted to do, but not knowing where that journey was going to take you and feeling very alone in that journey. And I know that's something that women on their fertility journeys face every single day, of just feeling alone. But it also shows your resilience and, like you've just mentioned, your determination. So talk to me about vulnerability and resilience, because we often perceive vulnerability as a weakness, yet we know that it's actually our greatest strength. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about vulnerability and resilience and how they work together and what they mean to you.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I believe that they're two twin strengths in a way, and it's kind of feels odd to sort of say vulnerability is a strength. As you said, it's always seen more as a weakness. And look, I'll be honest, when you feel vulnerable, you don't feel strong. You know,
Mm,
you do feel exposed and insecure, and all of those things that are not comfortable in that moment, in that time. However, I think that, you know, it's in those moments, if you can allow yourself just to sit with that, not for long periods of time, but just when they come up, because that's when possibilities bubble up at that
mm,
time. Um, and in my using my story as an example, that's when those thoughts, those ideas, they came to me at that time when I was just sitting in that vulnerability. And the resilience really comes from that beginning, if you like, to the unknown journey, because sometimes you don't have all the answers in that journey. Um, but it's that sort of ability to maintain that resilience and that determination, that fortitude, actually, against all odds at many times in your
mm.
life, to keep going. And even when you don't know what the outcome's going to be. And it's like, it can feel like jumping off a cliff at some point, because you just think, oh, wow, you know, I'm really not sure about where this is going. But I remember looking at my options at those points and thinking, well, I could go that way. I could go the way that I was told to go, or I could go this way, and keep looking at narrowing it down to these two approaches. And each time my decision was to keep going
Mm.
in the direction that I had chosen. And I think that applies to many things in life. Um, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't listen to good advice that's given to us, because there's some great advice out there, that's for sure. But I think if we always come back to what's happening for ourselves, you know, um, if it doesn't feel right, then listen to that. If it does feel right, then there's a little nudge in the right direction. I mean, vulnerability to me sits at the heart of humanity. It's who we are. Um, there is You can't have one without the other. You can't be resilient and not feel vulnerable. Or it's like saying you can't be courageous and never feel fear. Because I think it's when you face that fear is when you get the courage when you face the fear. You know,
You
uh,
do. Yeah.
not always conscious of it either at the time. You know, it's just something kicks in and you're in it and you're there. And then when you come out of it, you think, You know, did I just go through that? Oh, I did, you know. There's no real rules around it, but I think it's such a powerful experience to recognize for anyone in all situations. In my work that I do with storytelling, you know, this comes up a lot. I do ghostwriting for people who want to share their own stories, for example, and always in these stories, there are those vulnerable moments. There are the moments that are fearful. And then we get to the end, and their resilience is just, you know, way surpasses those original feelings. And none of the people that I work with have ever said, oh, you know, I'm super brave. No, for them, it's just what they've done. You know, it's just their experience. And that's why I feel that those two particular things that are very human are twin strengths. Yeah. So it's sort of the work that I've done is I do a lot of life stories. I work with people with their life stories. I used to be a radio journalist for many years, and you know, a lot of the interviews that I did were live, similar to what we're doing now. And you never quite knew what was going to pop out.
Yeah, where it was going to go.
That's right. And sometimes some amazing things would come out, and I remember looking at them thinking I never would have picked that story coming out of, you know, this person who didn't sort of really show that on first meet. So I think that we've all got some amazing stories that would reveal that. But talking about the vulnerability is not something that people are always comfortable to talk about. And especially at the moment, I think the buzzword is resilience, because we're in tough, changing times in the world. And so there's a lot of encouragement for people to be resilient in these times to get through, which I think is great. And we do need to draw from that in any situation, whether it's personally or professionally. But I like to feel that let's be real about it, and it's not that we all just step up and go, okay, I'm resilient today. It's about actually realizing that there are other things that are part of that as well. And I think when you can be really open and honest about that to yourself, it kind of puts you on a stronger footing when you are really working hard at being resilient for something, because you've got that reference point. Then you know that reference point, you know, when you've been at your most vulnerable. Sometimes it can be a great driving force to come away from that, to change that, to go where you want to go. In my case, in this story, it certainly was. So it can be a really good thing. It's like someone said to me a little while ago, this lady was talking about anger, for example, and she said that anger is a bad thing and we shouldn't have anger. And I understood where she was coming from, because she was coming from a very peaceful place. And I love that space as well. But I guess for me, it was about being real, and, you know, we're human beings and we do feel anger. And that anger can be not all a bad thing. It can be our determination to change something, or to change ourselves, or to reach an outcome that we really want to reach. So in the same vein, I think that's where vulnerability sits too, in that once you have experienced that, and it is your reference point, and from there, you know, you work through your own process with that. And resilience does come when you've made your mind up and that kicks in. If you really, really want that and you're really determined, it will happen. Definitely will happen. Anything can happen in that space, actually, you know.
Yes. Yeah. And I think the more we do it, the more that we see the outcomes of those things that we've really, when we really dig deep and we really want something and we know and we trust our intuition, this is
Yes,
where we're supposed to be headed. And then
yes.
we overcome great adversity, or we manage to achieve something that we could have only dreamt of, then we can use that as the building blocks to help us to move forward in our lives to the next big challenge. Because, you know, to be human is to face challenge. But what I personally love about vulnerability is the connection
Mm.
that as human beings, when we're vulnerable, when we share who we really are, and I know that you experience this with the work that you do, that's when we really connect with people. And that's a beautiful space of being able to make change. But
Mm.
anger, as you've just mentioned too, I
Mm.
remember when I was going through I was seeing a psychologist. I was preparing for the passing of my father. I thought that I had more time to come to terms with the fact that he was going to pass. And I'm actually really glad that I started doing that therapy when I did, because I only had a matter of months. I'd been told I probably had about 18 months, but it turned out that I only had a couple of months. And I remember being in the session with the psychologist, and she was asking me how I felt. And I kept kind of distracting her and distracting myself. And she kept coming back and being quite strong with me, you know, how do you feel? And I said, I don't know. And she said, well, I hear that you're angry. And I was horrified. I was like, angry? No, I should know better than to be angry. Like, I'm above being angry. Angry has no purpose. And I saw all the negative connotations in being angry. But what she gave me such a gift, and this was many years ago. She gave me such a gift because she helped me to see that anger has a huge purpose. It can move us to where we need to be. It can create huge change in the world. When we get angry, that's when we can move mountains. That's when we can come together as a collective consciousness and actually say, no, this needs to stop. This needs to end here. So
Mm.
for me, anger as an emotion is a wonderful emotion. It's how we express that anger, which is where we often fall apart.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely. That's right. That's the key, isn't it? As to whether
Yeah.
you can use it as a positive catalyst towards something, or whether it's going to cause more damage. So you make that decision or that choice, don't you, as to how you want to work with that particular emotion. I guess it's similar to many emotions, really, or shock, or a lot of things. If you look at even happening in the world right now, it's comes down to how we manage that, how we manage those emotions, and how we utilize them is the key. And it can be, all of them can be used in such positive ways, like you did. You use that anger then as your sort of your base, where everything else then was decided from there, and then you move forward.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it can be incredibly powerful. Um, it's I suppose it's like many things. Things can be misunderstood, and we're all learning things as we go. But it's interesting what you said, that you felt, I shouldn't be angry, and because
Mm.
you're told that, uh,
Yes.
that's right. And so it's sometimes it's clearing those beliefs, or the things that we have been told in our lives, to just be able to make it work for ourselves.
Exactly. And also knowing, having this understanding, this is what changed it for me too, that when we have an emotion, if we just surrender to the emotion, we allow ourselves to feel it wherever we feel it, that it will pass through us in about 90 seconds, which can feel like a long time depending on what you're doing in life. You know, 90 seconds can feel like forever, or it can feel like the shortest time ever. But
Yeah.
it's in that space of allowing our emotions to be seen, felt, heard, and expressed in the right way that we can
Mm.
move through them. Then we don't store them in our bodies.
Mm,
You
that's
know, you
right.
mentioned that was where you were storing your emotion, was in your stomach.
Yeah.
I hold my attention in my jaw, so I'm having to constantly.
Yeah.
But
My
when
sister used to
we're
grind her teeth and at night, that was her
yeah.
thing in the jaw. So yeah.
Yeah, but when
Mm.
we're aware of it, now I'm aware of it, it's just like when I feel it building up, I'm like, okay, I need to move my jaw, I need to do some yoga, I need to go for a walk, I need to, and it's because I'm now in tune with my body, and because you were in tune with your body, you were able to get to navigate through your fertility challenge at that point in your life.
That's a really good point, Sarah. I think it's about finding what works for you. I walk a lot. I love the beach. You know, I love walking in nature, yoga, meditate, all those things I've learned over the years, and I'll just work on whichever option I think is what I need at the time. And so that's part of our learning, is to work out what of those wonderful ways of creating and rebalancing ourselves is going to work for us. But I wanted to add another thing, just if I could, just for a couple of minutes.
Of course, yeah.
The other thing is how we express ourselves in moments of stress too. Is an interesting thing. So I've just I'm producing a documentary at the moment, for example, working with young people who often struggle to know a way to express themselves. And these are, as I mentioned, such changing times. We have some life experience to draw from. They're kind of still getting their filing cabinet full of enough to be able to draw from at an early age in life. And I kind of wanted to introduce some ways of expressing yourself in a documentary designed for young people. So I've got 5 young people, and they've all had challenges of different kinds. So whether it was getting bullied at school, or whether it was mental health issues, which most of them had at different times in varying degrees. And all of them have found an artistic way of expression. So I'm not saying this is for everybody, but I wanted to look at that as another option. And these remarkable stories have come out. You know, we've got a hip hop dancer, we've got a singer-songwriter, we've got 2 young budding actors coming up. They're with a theatre company now, and an Indigenous dancer. And all of them have the most amazing and incredibly challenging stories. So they're all ranged from about 15 to 21 years old. And the inspiring part about this is that all of them have found a way to rebalance those things in their lives, and they've done it by a way of expressing themselves. So it's really inspiring because they're actually doing it. And I guess also the message is that there's not one size that fits all, which often kind of comes across, as particularly in the education system. We're not all going to be coders or, you know, perhaps in the internet or technical field. There's nothing wrong with that either, because that can be creative too. But these guys have found another way. And so that sort of showed me a lot too. So I thought, wow, this is amazing. You know, they haven't quite slotted into some of the norms happening at the moment, but they found another way. And that in itself brings hope and inspiration, much the same as what we're talking about now in medical areas as well. You know, I guess the message through it all is that there's always a way somehow. There is.
Yes.
And I think if you just always have that there in the back of your mind, you may not know which way it is to start with, but there is always a way.
There is always a way. And I think creativity is such a beautiful way to express ourselves. That's something that I love to do, writing. My children are all creative. My son expresses himself through music and through acting. My daughter is a dancer. My other daughter is an artist. And for them, that is that thing that helps them through their challenges and helps them develop that sense of self. So if anybody's listening to this and you haven't expressed your creativity, you've just kind of put it in a box as something that you weren't encouraged to do when you were younger, there are so many ways to be creative and to express ourselves. It's a really beautiful process. So I really encourage you to to have a little think about that and see whether that's something that resonates for you, for sure.
I think too, I know for myself, when I get into that creative thinking, I call it my zone. And, it's kind of like you can just put everything out aside that you're thinking about or doing, and you can just focus on that sort of lovely creative process, which is full of possibilities. Um, and that in itself, it's kind of like a meditation in a way, because
Yes.
you can really all the outer things don't take over, in that moment. Um, so there's so many benefits, isn't there? As well as expressing yourself, there's that. It's like a centering. Would you agree? Like a
Oh, absolutely. It enables you to be present. When I'm writing, I'm
mm,
just so present in the moment that all the noise, all the monkey chatter, all the negative self-talk that we all go through just drifts away. The
yeah.
same with music. When we were going through COVID, as you know, living here in Melbourne, we were the most locked down city in the world. And I was homeschooling 3 children by myself, trying to run my business. And it was hard. But one of the things that I introduced into our daily routine, was we danced around the kitchen. Every day we just danced. And
Wonderful.
it was beautiful. It was a beautiful way of just expressing ourselves, getting our emotions out. So,
And a
and
release,
I,
like a real release.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Now my children just roll their eyes at me when I dance, because like we often we'll eat dinner together, and then I'll just start dancing and they just roll their eyes at me. Or my little one, she actually comes and joins in. She'll take a break from eating and she'll just get up and we'll dance and
Wow.
sit back down. It's
So
actually really
lovely.
beautiful. It was
But
such a
aren't you teaching
gift.
them some wonderful things, though, to be able to feel free, to be able to just express yourself and be in the moment and kind of tell yourself it's okay,
Yeah, yeah.
That's
And to be in
great.
your body, because I spent so many years not in my body,
Mm,
because I was so upset with my body because of all the things that it wasn't doing for me on my fertility journey, that I became very disconnected from my body. So anything that I can do to help my children to stay connected to their bodies and to really listen to their bodies and hear those messages that they are giving us all the time, I'm a big advocate for. So I
mm.
look ridiculous dancing around my kitchen, but it's all for a good cause.
And so much fun. How good is
It
that?
is. It
Yeah,
is. It is a lot of fun. A
it's
lot of fun.
fantastic, Sarah. That's really good. So would you say that disconnect is almost like a flight or fight thing? Is that, how would you describe it as that? Like, when things aren't quite right, you kind of just want to disconnect or separate yourself from that issue.
I think for me, it was shame. It was deep-rooted shame that as a woman, I couldn't do the one thing that my body was supposed to do, which was to have children. I mean, I was very fortunate. I'd already had my little boy. So I
Yeah.
knew that my body could do that, albeit that he'd been born prematurely. But it was just this, most people I knew, they would just have a child and then have another one and plan it, and it all went according to plan. And I was the first person that I knew at that time that was
Mm,
having so many challenges, and I felt ashamed. I couldn't give my son a sibling. I couldn't give my ex-husband another child. I couldn't give my mom another grandchild, and I carried a lot of shame. And I know that that is a big part of the fertility journey for
mm.
so many women that I meet and I speak to and I work with. And so I guess it was just my way of numbing
Yeah.
myself, and yeah, just like you said, just disconnecting, shutting down, trying
Mm,
to ignore what was happening because I didn't feel comfortable in my body. And
mm,
then when I got to a point where I'm lying in ICU and able to breathe and the doctors can't stop my deterioration and I'm literally facing my immortality, I suddenly realized that it was my body that had to heal itself in
mm,
order for me to be able to raise my son. And all
mm,
of a sudden, I just developed a completely different relationship with my body. And I was like, we're in this together. It's you and me.
mm,
And recognizing that the relationship I had with myself and my body was the most important one, because this
mm.
vehicle was going to house me forever. And
Yeah.
if I didn't treat it with love and kindness, then it wasn't really a surprise that it wasn't able to do all the beautiful things that I was asking you to do to create a life. So there was a huge learning on that journey, and now I love my body and I have such gratitude for it, and I spend a lot of time swimming and doing yoga and walking and just feeling who am I? Who's
Yeah.
this? Who's this body? Who am I within this body? All of those things.
Yeah,
So,
and how am I today, and what's happening with me today? It's
yeah.
interesting too. I note that you said that it's like the pressure that women have, of, have you got kids? And how many have you got? And there's all these questions. Most of the time I think that a lot of women are unaware of the fact that the genuineness of their question can add pressure on another woman. They don't mean it that way, but
Yeah.
it's part of our society, that it is a big pressure on women. The whole parenting thing, and children and so on, and that's hard, yeah, because it's almost like a private battle that goes on with that. I have that in a different way. So, my daughter passed away, as I've shared
Mm.
with you, in 2021. She had acute myeloid leukemia. Um, it's still hard. You don't ever get over that, but you learn how to manage it. And I have so many women. I went to an event just a little while ago, a networking event, and some fabulous women there. But probably about half of them were, oh, have you got children? you know,
Mm.
and it's a natural thing to ask. However, it's a different kind of pressure. My daughter was my only child, so
Mm.
do I say yes? Do I say no? Yes, I say yes, because she'll always be my child. She'll always be my daughter.
Yeah.
But no, she's not with us right now.
Mm.
And that's really hard too, because then I'm in a situation where I've got to sort of talk about that, which, I'm okay, but then it depends. I'm all right on a one-on-one situation, but at an event where there's lots of people, I find that really hard, really challenging. Everyone's looking at how I respond to that, and then they want to know things and they ask questions, and all of it is unintentionally confronting. Like, they don't mean to put me in that situation.
Mm.
I'm aware of that, but guys don't ask me that.
Okay, that's interesting.
Generally,
Yeah, it's true.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, unless maybe it's a conversation that comes later down the track, but generally they don't. um it's more for women, so I'm just sort of relating to the conversations around children, um, and being a mum and so on. Often within circles of women, things can come up that probably wouldn't normally come up in conversations, and they can, if you're going through your own challenges, whichever it might be, yeah, can be really confronting and quite isolating, because you kind of, the level that you share will depend on your comfort within talking to that person, or people. So you kind of thinking about how far do you want to go with that conversation, and I'm sure it was like that for you too, when at the beginning. And that could be challenging too.
Yeah, it's like that repeated sharing of the same story, isn't it? It's like the repeated grief of having to continually, like you said, explain. I know I was interviewing a lady last month who had had 5 miscarriages, and so for her, she's lost 5 children, but she was talking about the fact that when people ask her, "Do you have children? Do you not?" How does she navigate those questions? Because to her, yes, she's got 5 children, but they're not here, as you've beautifully explained.
Mhm.
And initially, she was not sharing that because she didn't want to have to deal with the other person's sadness, grief, discomfort, not knowing what to say, complete avoidance, changing of the subject, whatever people do to cope with that news, because we're not taught how to talk about death. We're not taught how to talk about grief. We all navigate through it very differently. She came to the conclusion for herself that she would just share, you know, I've got 5 children, but then they're not here, and that how other people dealt with that was actually on them, and was their journey and their healing journey, and whatever. But she shouldn't have to suppress and repress the truth just to make other people feel comfortable. So I want to say thank you for sharing on here and being vulnerable, because it's a challenging journey. And I know we spoke about that at the TEDx event, and I felt very humbled and privileged that you shared that with me, that you let me into your world, and that you explained and educated me around what that looked like for you, and how people perceive that, and you know, yeah, it's such a journey. So from my heart to yours, just thank you for sharing that and giving people just a small insight into your world.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to talk about at all. But it often leads to other conversations, like about empathy, you know, emotional intelligence and things like that, which I think a lot of people are sort of still defining. So the conversations can lead to really interesting discussions about other things that you know, we all are learning about in different ways. Yeah. But thanks for the acknowledgement.
Yeah. And it's one conversation at a time, isn't it? And when you were talking about the work that you're doing now, the fact that you work as a ghostwriter, the fact that you share people's life stories, I would love to talk about that, because I'm sure there's people listening that have thought about sharing their story, of putting pen to paper, that most people that start writing their story don't finish, that start writing a book don't finish. So the fact that there are so many different ways that we can actually get our books out into the world, I would love for you to dive into that, because I believe that we all have a story inside us that needs to be shared, whether that's verbally, whether that's in a book, whether that's somebody else writing our story and us dictating that and sharing our messages with them. I would love to hear more about the work that you do with people and how people can work with you.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, happy to talk about that anytime. Yeah, it's a fascinating field, and there's some pretty amazing stories out there. And I feel that by sharing them, we all have something to learn from them, to relate to understand, just to connect to, you know. And the wonderful thing with someone's story, and I certainly found this when I was working as a radio journalist, you know, people would come up to me and they'd say, gee, Sina, you know, I never knew about that. And gee, I've learned something there. But at the end of the day, they were relating to everything from a human to human connection. And that really taught me a lot about the power of story and sharing story. I mean, I actually believe that, you know, story is a powerful agent for transformation and capacity building, you know, if it's used for a particular message or a theme. So it can be used in so many ways. But at the end of the day, there is so much richness in a story, and things are weaved through it, you know, times and places, and there's so many aspects about story that come through. There's information, there's history, there's gender differences, there's you know, it just, the list goes on. And it's easy for people to listen to someone's story than have someone speak at them about something. And the sharing of that, I find too, is really interesting. I actually just did an interview yesterday with an Indigenous elder, actually. She's 84, and Oh, what a remarkable story. Just amazing story. She's very humble. First time she shared her story. And she said, checked in with her afterwards and said, I asked her how she was feeling because it was a big thing, to share. And she said, Sina, I actually I feel freer. She said, I feel I can let go of a lot of things now. I feel quite empowered. And that for me was just wonderful to hear, because through that process, she was able to actually get some healing in there. She was ready to share her story. And that's the other side to it. So it's not just the people who are listening or reading the story, it's the people who are actually telling their story benefit also. So I think the two aspects of that, it is really quite powerful. And look, this is not new. We've had storytellers for centuries and centuries. The bards in Europe were storytellers, and then the Indigenous cultures, storytelling has been there through the ages. So none of it is new. But I think I don't know. I just think in the times that we're in now, we're very much in an information overload sometimes, although I love learning, so I don't have an issue with that, but there's a lot of information coming at us in various ways, and storytelling is just kind of makes you go, okay, this is good, I'm really going to listen to this story, and it just kind of takes you away from all the facts and figures, even though there are facts in the stories, but it's human related, it's that's what I love about it. So yeah, that's why I decided to make a business in doing storytelling. I've always used it in the work that I've done over the years. I worked in change for a long time, so I worked with people who were in organisations that were going through big changes or closing down in some cases. So a lot of people were made redundant. So I use storytelling a lot for that, and it was powerful then too. Yeah. So, I did some uni degrees and blew a few brain cells and learned some stuff, and looked at my options of ways. As you rightly said, there's so many ways of sharing stories, and so whether it's digitally or whether it's visually in film or audio or written or reading, it doesn't really matter, but I try to give as many options as possible, because I think that we all gravitate to different ways. There's no right or wrong, but it's a wonderful area to be able to work in. It really is, yeah.
It's such a beautiful space to work. I know for me, sharing my story has been very cathartic and healing. But
Yes.
beyond that, I think when we share our stories, we leave a legacy for future generations that we will never have the privilege to meet. And we never know how our stories and our words are going to impact other people. And sometimes we can hear the same thing 20 different times, but it's just the 21st time we hear it slightly differently. We hear it when we're ready. We hear it in a different way. And I love that. So I think if anybody is listening to this and you know that you have a story inside you and you want to share it, but you don't know how to do that, do reach out to Sina. Have a conversation with her. How can people find you and connect with you, Sina, if they're curious?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So just hop on the website, my website, which is impactstories.com.au. And you can have a look at the different things different ways or methods of storytelling that I work with there. And my phone number and email are on there as well. I'm also on LinkedIn. Look up my name, Sina Summers. It's a little bit of an unusual name, so you might probably won't find too many Sina Summers in there. And Facebook as well. So yeah, both social media accounts. Yeah, I'd love to hear from anyone who's interested. Let's have a talk and see how we can get your story out.
Yes, beautiful. I have absolutely loved our conversation. I always learn so much from you, and you have the most beautiful energy. So thank you for that. Is there anything that you would like to share? Just some final words of wisdom that you would like to share with the audience?
Final words of wisdom. Well, so I found a really good quote recently about leadership, which is interesting. Why should we introduce leadership? I think there's a lot of people are questioning what leadership is these days, and it can be many things. But I quite like this one, and it's leadership is demonstrated by what we learn and how we act. And I think that it really applies to what we've been talking about today in ourselves, what we learn in our journeys and our lives, and how we act as our own style of leading our own way.
Beautiful. Yeah. It's so very, very true.
Yeah.
So
Thank
true.
you so much, Sarah, for inviting me on here today. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and I hope all your listeners have got a little bit of something out of today and sharing what we've shared today.
Oh, they absolutely will. It has been such a pleasure to talk to you, to learn from you. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm looking forward to seeing where your journey takes you next.
You and me both.
Take care.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.